Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Crimes and I am your host for this week's Women in Health Tech Wednesday. I am very excited to welcome our guest today, Melissa Lohr, who's the Chief Compliance Officer for FFF Enterprises. Melissa, I have had the great pleasure of working with many of your colleagues at FFF, and I have really had the pleasure to get to know them. So I'm very excited about this and getting to know you. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Well, why don't we just jump right in, and that I'm going to let you give a little bit about your role and your background, and we'll get started there.
I'm a legal and compliance professional. I practiced in private practice for about 10 years before joining the life sciences industry on the pharmaceutical manufacturer side, where I worked in various legal and compliance roles for about 12 years before making the switch to FFF, which is a specialty pharmaceutical distributor that specializes in plasma products, rare and orphan drugs, and vaccines. So definitely enjoying that transition to learn more about the distribution side of things. And on a personal note, I will just add, because I do think these are good to know, that I am married and have 5 kids ranging in age from 7 to 16.
Oh my
so you
gosh,
can keep that in mind.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a big responsibility.
It is. Keeps life interesting.
That's fantastic. I love that. Well, so one of the things that I think that we wanted to talk about today actually is around the topic of diversity. So I'm just going to jump in and we'll use that. I love knowing about your background and you personally, but let's also just jump right into this question as well. So knowing that that's a passion of yours, how would you define it?
You know, I think there's so many facets to diversity, and we hear a lot about racial and ethnic diversity and gender diversity, but there really are so many different ways that, you know, we are diverse, right? And I think sometimes we don't give enough credit to making sure that we bring people together that have different backgrounds, you know, whether it's geographical, right? Where did you grow up? Where did you come from? What kind of family did you grow up in? You know, was it a traditional family? Was it non-traditional? You know, and thinking about socioeconomic background, you know, the way we experience life as a child really impacts our views and perspectives. And I just think there's so many different ways to think about diversity, and certainly the ethnic and racial and gender diversity are critical. So I don't mean to downplay those, but I do think there's so many ways to make sure that we have diversity, and we should make sure that we're crediting all of those different ways.
I love it. Yes, absolutely. So many different ways. So I absolutely love that. So what do you think is important to have a woman's voice in business and even specifically in healthcare?
Well, I mean, I will say, you know, I've read before that I think up to like 80% of healthcare decisions are made by women. And so when you think about that, why wouldn't you have a woman's voice, right? I mean, if you're in the healthcare industry and you're trying to figure out, what's the next product or service that we need to offer, how should we market this to people, or do people even know, you know, what we have to offer? You know, women are your primary consumer, and so I just think it makes so much sense to include women who oftentimes, you know, today are managing the household, managing the budget. They're making those decisions, and so to me, that's just good business.
Really good point. I mean, you think about caregivers too. I mean, often that role comes in. So not just as a parent, which is a critical role, but as a, maybe it's your parent or, someone in the family or someone along those lines, but you're a really good point. So what are your thoughts around, how can having more diverse staff lead to positive changes in the work, in healthcare or even in the workplace?
Well, you know, I mentioned before kind of having that different perspective. I just think at the end of the day, when you have people who can bring different ideas, a different lens, you end up with a better result. And I think about even, age-wise, right? We think generationally and having some of the younger generation, come in and they really look at things differently. And so I think being able to have that diversity leads to more ideas, better discussions, and a better end result. And so to me, it's really important to make sure, that I'm hearing all those voices. I don't want to be surrounded by a team of people who are going to just echo what I say, either because that's their perspective too, right?
Yeah,
or because they
absolutely.
feel like, they should. So it's good.
Absolutely. Well, so you talked about this and the importance of having, the majority of healthcare decisions in the family are made by women, of course, and why don't we always listen to them? So that's I love that. So we know that there are different types of care. Also, can you talk about the importance of informing women of all their healthcare options and decisions?
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm afraid that we take for granted is that people already know. There's such a wealth of information available on the internet
Mhm.
today that I think we sometimes think like, oh, well, of course someone knows X or Y. But I think being in the healthcare industry, it's incumbent on us to make sure we're educating people about those options. And we're talking to them, as someone who's going to make that decision, who needs to understand, what the options are, what's going to happen if I, choose this option versus that option. So I just think we shouldn't take for granted that people already know those things, or that they are kind of speaking the same language as us, if you will, in the sense that, you think about health literacy and not just understanding kind of medical terms or those types of things, but consider you have a doctor who says you should take it easy for a few days. Well, take it easy for you might mean something different than take it easy for me, right?
Right.
And so I think we have to make sure we're being precise and we're educating people, so they can make the best decisions for them.
So do you think we're making enough efforts around this to really try and understand women?
I think we are definitely improving, I would say. I know there's been a lot of attention paid to this. I think there has been some focus on it. I think we're at an interesting time in this country around healthcare decisions and women. And so I think there's definitely room to improve. It's certainly on certain issues, but I do think we have to make a deliberate effort to really include women in those decisions, and in the education of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know our audience has a lot of experience in the clinical trial space. What do you think about diversity specifically in the clinical trial space?
We need more of it. I think, we've seen where, different, whether it's different ethnic backgrounds or, gender actually does make a difference in how, medicine works, for instance. And I think, we definitely have people who are committed. A lot of the manufacturers are really committed to trying to recruit more diverse subjects in their clinical trials. But, I think it's also more than just getting diverse subjects. It's also thinking about, what am I asking people? What am I looking for in terms of side effects, in terms of impact of these medicines? And one example that I'm sure many people heard about was, related to the pandemic, and that women were anecdotally reporting that either as a result of having COVID or getting vaccinated, that they were seeing changes in their menstrual cycle. And, I think it really just brought to light that that's not necessarily something that is commonly asked about, in a, questionnaire or interview
Right.
after treatment. And we need to think about those types of things, because we can ask, did you have any side effects? But I'm not even sure, as a woman, that I would have thought to mention that, especially if the product, wasn't necessarily related to reproductive, health or something like that. And so I
Right.
think we have to really think about how can these drugs impact people, and what do we need to be asking them to make sure that we're really understanding the way things work? And, lots of times that's how we discover new drugs, right? Because we find out something from a prior candidate that impacted people in a way that we weren't anticipating. And then we can go down that road and find, the next cure for something. So I think we're on the path, but we need to focus on that as well.
I love that. I have not thought about things this way either from the clinical trial side, and just kind of bringing in not only the healthcare literacy that you mentioned, but just really understanding people for where they are, and specifically women, and their uniqueness and their unique needs. So I think that's really important. That's really interesting to understand that too. So speaking of the pandemic, how has that impacted women's health? I mean, do you have other examples of maybe how it's impacted?
I do. I think, unfortunately, it set us back, right? And not just women, but everyone, but, particularly women who I think tend to put themselves last, if you will. They have their caregiver, whether it's children, aging parents, whatever the situation may be. We often put our health needs, and definitely preventive health needs, on the back burner. And, you hear stories about, and I think this is very widespread, but, people not even seeing, an OBGYN or primary care doctor for 2 or 3 years. And you think about all the things that can happen in your body in that time period. And so, right. I think we're really in a period of catch up. And I think on top of that, we saw such a drastic reduction in healthcare workers during the pandemic, from, burnout and people retiring and not coming back, that we continue to have a supply and demand issue, right. Where we have all of this pent up need for healthcare and not necessarily, access when we need it. And where we need it. And so, I think, unfortunately, as with many things, the pandemic had a really negative effect on women's health. And, I just hope that we can start to get back to a place where that becomes routine for women.
I think the key there is routine. I've thought about it, for myself, whereas, where you just know your dental cleans every 6 months are preventative every year. It was just such a part of our life. And then you stop and go, wait, it's been 2 years. What happened? So getting that back on schedule. And then just kind of adding to what you said too, I guess there's all the mental health aspects of care as well for women. So, I know that's a big focus of ours as well. I thought I would throw that in for you.
It is. And that's another area where we see a shortage of providers. I tried to make an appointment with my, women's health doctor, and was told, they have a wait list, that it's literally months and months before I can get in. And the wait list is so long, their calendar isn't even open. I have to call back. It's just that type of thing that it's, I felt like I made such an effort to actually reach out and make the appointment, which I'm sure many people can relate to, right? You've got a million things you're balancing, and it's like, oh yeah, I need to go in. And then to have that be the result, I was like, oh my gosh. So, trying to figure out, now, do I try and find another provider? Do I just wait, put another reminder in my calendar? So I think we're seeing that, and mental health is huge too. We need to be able to, deal with everything that happened, and it's a lot. And I don't think that we should, ignore that.
Absolutely. What are some suggestions that you have then of how we might better prioritize? I'm listening too. What are your suggestions on maybe how to start to prioritize better, knowing that you're a mother of 5, that parental guilt and a successful career guilt, all those things that we tend to maybe even put ahead of our own health?
I think, well, first of all, I wish I had the magic answer. But I don't. I have
Fine.
some ideas, and one of the things, I'm probably not the only one who keeps a running to-do list, on my desk, or your computer, if you will. I put those things on my to-do list, right? Schedule mammogram, whatever it is, to make sure that it's not just somewhere in the back of my mind that keeps getting pushed back and back. And so I think that's one thing, is you have to make it a priority, right? So what do you do with other things that are priorities, and try and treat it the same way? I think we have to give ourselves permission, in the same way that if you broke your leg, you would take off an hour or two from work to go get medical treatment, right?
That's right.
And I think we have to recognize that sometimes you have to do it, and we shouldn't apologize for taking care of ourselves. I think I always think of the instructions they give you on the airplane, right? About the oxygen mask. If the cabin gets depressurized, then you should, put your own oxygen mask on before you help others, because if you don't put yours on, you won't be able to help anyone else. And so I think about that in the context of health. If I don't take care of my health, I'm not necessarily going to be able to take care of my kids or my parents or my partner, whatever it is. And so I think we have to just try and keep that in mind. Easier said than done, of course.
Right.
But I think it is, I've also heard of people who do, schedules with their sister to go get mammograms. Let's make it a day. Let's go, get mammograms and go have lunch. Or trying to say, this is my appointment day. I'm going to go to the dentist in the morning, then I'm going to go, this. And if you plan it out,
That's a good idea.
Take one day and say, this is going to be the day that I go and, take care of all of that stuff that's happening, and just do it. So, I wish everyone luck. I hope they can figure it out. It is hard, and you have to make an effort.
I think one start too is just even talking about it, right? I mean, it's okay to say, this is what I'm taking care of myself, and I prioritize this, and I cancel my meetings for this day for this, specific purpose. So I love that one day. And then I also love putting the mask on. I always use that example because it's so important that we do that, of course. I think you've kind of hit on this too, kind of through that thinking about it from a guilt perspective, but just balancing work and personal life, that is that is also the topic that we talk about a lot, and just how to do that successfully.
Yeah, I think, one thing for me that I think is really important is to give ourselves permission to ask for help when we need it. I have, obviously 5 kids, a lot of activities, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, all of those things. I'm very fortunate that I have a spouse who is very much a participant in all of those things. But, it's also important that you say, you know what, I can't do all this. Maybe you call on your neighbor or a family member to help with carpools, or, think about all those things, that you need to do, and say, which are the ones that uniquely I can do, right? I need to work on this report at work. I can't ask somebody else to do that for me. But you know what? I don't need to go to Target and pick out the birthday gift for, Joey's 8th birthday, right? So maybe I can ask somebody else while they're there to grab it for me, right? And just thinking about those things that you can maybe ask for some help with. And it's okay to say, I need help. I have a lot going on. I think sometimes as women, especially, we're told we shouldn't ask for help because it's a sign of weakness. But I think it's okay to say, I need a little help with this. I have too much right now. And, I need someone to take over some of it.
So maybe it's not about doing it all. It's about prioritizing the important things and doing what's important.
Yeah.
Love that.
Absolutely.
Love that. Well, so I love your, as we're coming down to the end here, just your final thoughts and advice, maybe even to the younger generation of women that are behind us that I'm excited about, and always love to share the lessons that we've learned. What are some of your final thoughts around that?
I mean, I think I have a couple, right? The first one, as a parent, there's always that struggle, and a professional of, if I'm leaving early to go to my child's, sporting event, what do I say? Right. Someone wants to set up a meeting at that time. I think it's hard when you're, first coming up in the workforce and you're younger to say that, because I think people feel like, oh my God, I can't tell them that's why I'm leaving. I think as you get more senior and you become a leader, it really is important to set that example and say, you know what, I can't meet today at 4 because I'm going to my daughter's soccer game. But let's meet tomorrow, or, whatever it is. I think it gives people permission, both men and women, by the way, to do those things also and feel, that it's okay. I think the other thing that I would share, and this is something I think I actually read this article on LinkedIn, but it was about turning apologies into gratitude statements. And so what I mean by that is, think about, you've got 42 emails in your inbox that you have to respond to. Some of them have been sitting there for a while, and so many of us start that email by saying, oh, I'm so sorry for the delay in responding to you, or, please accept my apologies, and we start out with this tone that suggests we've done something wrong. And the reality is there's such an enormous workload and expectation for how much we do as workers in this country.
Right.
Why start that conversation by suggesting that you've done something wrong, right? Respond with a statement of gratitude. Thanks for your patience as I looked into this, right? So something that recognizes that maybe they've been waiting longer than they would have liked to, but you're not apologizing that you have a lot of work to do. Right? We all do. And I just think that's a great way to change the tone and the dynamic of what's going on, in the workplace. It's not an apology. I didn't do anything wrong. But I do appreciate that you've been patient.
I love that. Even just being kind to yourself and removing some of that guilt right off by the way you're responding. That's fantastic. Melissa, we've got a couple of comments from our questions from the audience that I thought I would add in as well. I thought you would enjoy this one, but should pharma start marketing to more women's health?
Look, there's a healthy debate about pharma marketing in general, and whether it's helpful or not. But I do think, people need to think about who's going to be making the decisions on this healthcare, right? It's not necessarily the patient always, right? And I do think, some healthy market research, would inform the, pharma about, who should their audience be for these things.
Yeah, I love that. Love it. So here's another one too that talks about how can we make more efforts to inform women of their healthcare options. And I think we touched on that one a little bit, but you may have some more thoughts on it as well.
I think a lot of the pharma companies definitely, and some of the patient advocacy groups do a really nice job of having websites that have lots of information on them. I think one of the challenges today is sorting through the information and the misinformation, right? And that's a real challenge. You think about just vaccines in general, right? That's an area where there's a lot of information out there. Some of it is accurate, some of it isn't. And so I think, the first thing, being in the industry, if you're a treater maybe, or, is asking the questions. Do you understand? Do you need more information about, right? We can't just assume. And so I think that's a good way to start that conversation, because some people aren't necessarily going to ask.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then I think this last one is probably stemmed from your comments around COVID, but how has COVID actually affected reproductive health? I don't know if you've got some thoughts on that.
First of all, I will say, I don't think we know. Right. Yeah. We have an entire population of people that, have been, impacted by this, by COVID, having gotten it. We don't know the long-term effects of it. We really, from a scientific standpoint, I'm not sure we know. From a social standpoint, I think it's been huge. I think you've seen you know, a whole group, a cohort of people whose lives were put on hold. You know, you had women who were afraid to have a child during this time period. They were afraid they might get COVID, and what would that do to their, you know, pregnancy and to their unborn child. And so I think we've definitely got, you know, it'll be interesting to see birth rates, you know, as we go back through time. And, you know, you think about the weddings that got postponed and the, you know, family planning, just all of those things. So I just, I think, you know, the other problem that we have is around contraceptive, right? You had 2 or 3 years where you weren't going to see a woman's health doctor. And so you had women who maybe didn't get access to contraception when, you know, they really should have or wanted to. That's a whole issue in and of itself. So we have a lot of room to make up for the lost time.
All great insights, and I really appreciate your thoughts around this. I mean, it sounds some of my big takeaways are, one, taking care of yourself, being kind to yourself through this process, but also just asking the question and looking for those connections and keeping the unique perspective of women, not only in our own health, but in our family's health as well. So thank you so much, Melissa. This was really a pleasure to chat with you and learn more about you and to hear your insights.
Having me, it's been great.